morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear dignitaries on the dais, speakers and panelists, CII members, delegates, and my dear fellow CV industry colleagues. I welcome you all to the first ever CV Summit organized by CII in Chennai. Right, so welcome you all, and I hope you all have a very interesting, knowledgeable, interactive session throughout the day. Right, so CV industry is not really a very fancy industry, right? So CV industry is something like mechanical engineering in universities. How many of you are mechanical engineers here? A lot of them. So you remember those days in college? No glamour, boring, blue overcoats, going to these workshops, right? So CV industry is like that. But like mechanical engineering, CV industry helps to build the nation, right? So we play a very important role in terms of building the nation. So we all have to feel proud of that. So I request all of you to raise your hand, pat your neighbor and thank for building the nation. Yes. So I feel very proud to work in CV industry. So I remember 10-12 years back, one of my senior, we invited him to address the team, and then he came and then he said, working in CV industry is like doing a very noble profession. Right? So I asked him how it is, because when we talk about noble profession, then two professions come to us. One is teaching, other is medicine, right? So how CV industry is a noble profession? So then he said, Pradeep, in CV industry, we don't sell product, right? So we offer livelihood to people. Right? So every truck or a bus that we sell gives livelihood to minimum 2 people in the country. One is the owner, and other is the driver. Right? So that means every truck and bus that goes out because of all of us here, or every set of wheels that goes out of your plant, every cooling system that goes out, or every bunch of fasteners that goes out, or every axle that goes out of your plants is creating livelihood for minimum 2 people in the country. Right? So that's number one. Second, CV industry is like the lifeline of the society, or lifeline of humanity. Right? So from the morning milk that we take till the evening beer, everything reaches us by some means on the commercial vehicles, right? So that means without CVs, we are not here. Society is not here. So these are the 2 reasons why CV industry or CV profession is a very noble profession, right? So again, in the morning, let's all feel very proud of being part of this noble industry through which we are building the society, and then we are building the nation. So when we say building the nation and building the society, then comes all the other elements of how we can build it better, or how we can make the society better. And that's where the technology plays a role, and that's why we are here in terms of discussing on the future of how we can build the CV industry better, right? So roughly 22 years back, when I was still a young engineer, my boss went to IAA. So how many of you have visited IAA so far? Not many, okay. So those days it used to happen in Frankfurt, and now it happens in Hanover. Right, so IAA is like Mecca of CV industry, right? So you go there to see the latest happenings in commercial vehicles. And my boss came with a big bunch of brochures, and I said, Pradeep, can you help me to make a report out of it? Right? I said, okay. For me, it was like, okay, it helps me to learn. So I said, okay, and then I was going through all the brochures, and I was wondering when India will have all this, right? So the vehicle that we have in the country to the vehicles that I see in this brochure were like too far. and when India will have this. And this year, 2023, in the Auto Expo, we closed the gap significantly. Right? So this year, there were exhibits in the Auto Expo in India, which is even exactly the same exhibits which travel from IAA from Germany. Right? So I think it needs a round of applause, because that makes all of us proud that we are closing the gap. And it's our job in the coming years to make Auto Expo a benchmark. No? So I remember people from East going to West with measuring tape, cameras, scale, right, all that stuff to benchmark in all these fairs from the West. And I'm sure in coming years, from West we will see people coming to East, to India, to Auto Expo to do benchmarking. Right? So, and that's all because of all of us sitting in the room working towards making the technologies of commercial vehicles better. Let us continue to do that. Right? So, what are the opportunities that we have that can help us in terms of making the commercial vehicle industry in India very progressive and then technologically advanced? I'll talk about four things in brief. First one, of course, is the technology towards sustainability. Right? So when we talk about technology towards sustainability, India has a very unique situation which no other country in the world talks about today. You go to any country and talk about sustainability, they will talk about zero emission vehicle, right? So, but for us, we have a two-step approach towards this sustainability. The first goal that we have is to become energy independent by 2047. And this step is very important for economic prosperity of the country. Right? So, and how do we reach that is by looking at all the possible energy options that can help us in terms of making ourselves energy self-sufficient. Right? So, and that's the reason why you hear a lot of activities in terms of all the alternate fuels. And sometimes with blends, different combinations. Today, nobody knows what is the right composition. Right? So everyone is experimenting, but the results of this experiment will help with prosperity of the country. And the second step is by 2070 to reach carbon neutral or zero emission, right? So these are the two steps that is ahead of us, and then we all have a very important role to play towards realizing the sustainable mobility for the country. Second element is the technology towards safety. Safety is still not seen as a very important element on the Indian roads, but I'm happy that the awareness is getting built. There are now fleet owners who are asking for safety features, right? So, and here again, we have a lot of things to do. So, if you see, when I spoke about IAA, we have closed the gap significantly in terms of powertrain. But in terms of safety, we still have that gap. The gap is very wide. Right? So, and this is an area which we have to work in the coming years so that then we close the gap. It's not important that we close the gap with IAA. It's important that we save lives on the Indian road. Every life that we save is going to keep a family alive. Right? So that's another important task that we all have, to work on solutions which make Indian roads safer. Third is comfort. Right? So when I talk about comfort for our drivers, right? So drivers are the most important stakeholders of our industry, right? And then the one who is not given that importance today. And we have to make driving a profession which is looked for, right? So, and how that can happen is by enhancing and then giving a better lifestyle for the drivers, and that can happen when we take care of the comfort for them. You know? So there are some studies done, and then it revealed that a lot of drivers who drive trucks have a hearing impairment on their right ears. That happens because of the continuous wind blowing towards the right. They sacrifice their health for their livelihood, and by giving a little more comfort, making the workplace for them better, we can help to keep their health better. and not lose their health, right? So that's the third point. And last, but not the least, is how we embrace software and technology, right? So finally, the CV industry is also becoming a tech industry with a lot of glamours as we move forward. So that's another area that's going to change. So today, a lot of us are mechanical engineers, but tomorrow, a lot of us have to become mechatronics engineers or software engineers. So every component or every system that you deal with can have the capability of combining with software. That's the change that's going to happen, and then that means then we have to also prepare ourselves for that. So these are the four elements: sustainability, safety, comfort, and software, which can help us in terms of further strengthening the CV industry, and then make or help the nation progress even better and faster. Right, so before I conclude, we as Indian CV community have some strengths, and I have not seen that in other areas, right? Other parts of the world. The number one strength that we have is the speed. We are the fastest. Okay, so we have one competitor who is our neighbor, but I'm confident we can be faster than our neighbor, which means then globally we can be the fastest industry, fastest CV industry in the world. Number two, we are comfortable with chaos. No one else in the world is comfortable with chaos. So we are very comfortable with chaos. We will be able to find order in chaos and then find solutions for our customers. So this is the second strength that we have. Third, we are frugal. The cost structure with which the industry operates can't be imagined by some countries in the West. So we are frugal. And last, but not the least, we have the most complex base type situation. Now, when I say base type, the number of vehicle configuration that's possible. India has the most complex base type situation in the world. And so when I showcase some of the products that we have to my colleagues who come from outside, they are surprised. Are these for on-road? I say yes, it's all for on-road. Right? So these are our strengths. We are faster, we are comfortable with chaos, and we are frugal, and we handle the most complex situation. That means we are unique, and we can lead the world in the future. And let's all work towards that. Together, let us work towards transforming the livelihood of our people in the country. I would like to finish my address by stating our Daimler truck purpose, which is even applicable to the entire CV industry. So we keep moving for all who keep the world moving. Right? CV industry keeps the world moving, and we all keep moving for that purpose. So thank you all for joining here, and I'm sure the whole day is going to be very interesting for all of us. And with this, then I would like to invite Mr. Gajanan for his special request. Thank you.
So thank you, Pradeep. I hope the next 10 years will not be as boring as Pradeep mentioned when you were in college. And if all of you have that much time, I look at all of you and I can see almost all of you have more than 20, 30 years to go. So it will be definitely much more exciting. So sit tight on your seats and tighten your seat belts. I'm going to talk a little bit about future of alternate fuel technologies and where we are going with respect to that in India and all over the world too. So the first question for all of us is, why do we really need alternate fuels? Why can't we just keep going with diesel, right? Diesel is a known, trusted fuel for last 100 plus years. It is very easy to use, etc., etc., etc. And so why can't we just keep doing it? So clearly, we have witnessed our planet facing a lot of challenges for the last 30, 40 years. The temperatures have been rising, pollution levels have been increasing, and which is why the Paris Accord, which happened in 2015, I believe, decided that we are going to limit the rise in temperature over the next few years by 1.5 degrees. And 195 countries signed that accord. So clearly, we want to protect the planet that we live on and make sure our kids and our grandkids are able to enjoy that life too that we enjoy. India unfortunately has the maximum number of polluted cities in the world. We are the leaders in pollution, which is not a great thing to be. We account for almost 2.5 million metric tons of carbon, which is 7% of the global emission. We don't even make 2% of the global vehicles, and now we're talking about 7% of the emission, which is really bad. Okay, and most of it is coming from diesel used in commercial vehicles. Why am I talking about it? Because it's all commercial vehicles. Again, the diesel contributes almost 2.5 pm, which is 40% of the total pollution in India. And the government of India also has set renewable targets, which about 500 gigawatts by 2030, where that will help us reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Now, this is one angle. We want to look at our pollution, we look at sustainability, very critical. The other angle is our GDP impact. Okay? We import a lot of diesel and petrol and gasoline and crude oil, right? So 85% of our fuel is imported. I mean, so does Japan, so does China, but we unfortunately do not have the trade surpluses that China and Japan have. So every year as we import, our trade deficit keeps going up, the current account deficit keeps going up. And that, as your imports go up, your GDP gets affected, your rupee degrades against the dollar because all of these purchases are in dollars. So clearly, this is one strong impact for us. Inflation goes up because of that. Every time fuel prices go up. We also contribute 30 billion every year. I don't know how many of you know this, but $30 billion in subsidies every year is given by government of India. Now, this same 30 billion is actually used to promote hydrogen. We could have hydrogen in 5 years. The kind of investment required for LNG or hydrogen is somewhere in the range of 25 billion for the infrastructure and. So clearly, if we did not do this subsidies and actually supported alternate fuels, we could be much ahead in the future rather than take so many years. And third, of course, is the operational and financial efficiency of these fuels. Operating fuels, most of these have higher efficiency than diesel. Hydrogen has almost 3 times of that. And operating costs are also much lower. As you know, electricity costs much lower than diesel or petrol. Almost to the tune of 1 rupee per kilometer in many cases for passenger cars. So what are the factors that will affect the future of mobility in India? So clearly sustainability and pollution levels are important. I spoke about that. Regulatory norms, the government of India keeps forcing these norms and affecting the production of engines and other vehicles in India. We have BS6 Plus now that has been introduced from April. The different types of alternate fuels we have: LNG, hybrid, PEV, FCEV, mix of ethanol and diesel and hydrogen and CNG and so on and so forth. Availability of charging and refueling infrastructure clearly is going to be one of the most important criteria for alternate fuels. Transportation of fuel in the case of hydrogen or LNG is going to be very critical. It has to be safe, as Pradeep mentioned, as well as lower cost. So today hydrogen costs 5 rupees a kilo. Target is to get to 1 rupee a kilo. The government is still working towards pushing more and more investors like Ambani's, Adani's, IOCs, etc. to invest big time in this area. And finally, in case of EVs, the battery recycling is going to be a major problem. The technology keeps changing every 3 years. So a lot of people, including me, are a bit hesitant to buy electric vehicles because I believe 3 years from now, if the battery technology changes, my car will be 40%, depreciated anyway. So same with fuel cells. How do we recycle them? So what's the government of India's policy and how does it support alternate fuels? So one is on the left side, you can see the pledges that we have made in terms of climate zero emissions by 2070, 500 gigawatts by 2030, and then reducing the carbon intensity, by 45% in 2030. This is on trying to see the impact of what we are going to do. And on the positive side, the government is also investing heavily through FAME 2 incentives of $1.2 billion, through PLI schemes for auto OEMs as well as components of $5.5 billion. And then, of course, signing up for the International Solar Alliance, where, as you can see today, a lot of companies are going into solar parks and solar power and all that. Almost $1 trillion of investment. So, Government of India is clearly spearheading this change and driving this change. And thanks to the minister who is pushing this kind of change to happen sooner than later. So how do these fuel technologies compare? Now I'm not going to go through each one of them, but diesel, as we know, is very easy to operate. LNG is one that is actually could be a very quick replacement for diesel because it comes from the same family. And whether it's in the form of CNG for smaller cars or LNG, liquefied natural gas for heavy vehicles, it has to be processed in that particular form. Now, CNG is starting to become very popular, whereas LNG, which requires to be in liquid form, will take a little bit of time because you need safety to process it and transport it and distribute it. So, but the cost of maintaining and operating are lower, efficiency is higher in these cases, and adaptation of current engines and transmissions is easy. Okay, so LNG has benefits which some of the companies are looking at and pushing. And when I say LNG, it could be CNG also. Electric, on the other hand, is seeing more traction on buses and two-wheelers, three-wheelers, primarily because for two and three-wheelers battery packs are smaller. For buses, because of the pollution they do, and government-sponsored, FAME 2 incentives are allowing it to become more and more prevalent. At the same time, I was just with one of the CEOs of a bus company, and he was telling me that getting the government to cough up the money is becoming more and more difficult. Getting the banks to subsidize or give the loans because of the higher interest rates is becoming difficult. So all these things are contributing to the resistance to, and then state-owned enterprises, which are actually the owners of the bus, have to give a long-term commitment to pay, and that is also a big question mark all the time. So these are all the problems that they are facing, apart from the typical charging infrastructure and the resistance, the limited vehicle ranges and so on and so forth. Of course, the electric vehicles have their significant advantages of zero emissions, lower operating costs, low maintenance, etc., apart from government subsidies. The last one on hydrogen fuel cell, this is one where I think we should all be excited. This is an area of growth that's happening all over the world. A lot of companies as well as governments are investing in this technology. Hydrogen is plentifully available in the world. It can be processed through ammonia or petroleum or many other sources. Again, a lot of research and development needs to happen here. We need to ensure that we transport hydrogen safely, distribute hydrogen safely, and deliver hydrogen safely. Right? So all those things have to be taken into account when we try to get hydrogen vehicles. Now, a few hydrogen vehicles have been developed in the country. I think Tata has developed one which is running. A Toyota car is also running, which Mr. Gadkari drives, I believe, or uses. So there is some traction in Japan also on hydrogen vehicles. So what are the various governments in India doing about hydrogen? There is a huge amount of investment that's happening in the hydrogen area of 10.2 trillion till 2050. Okay? That's a committed investment that a lot of countries have made. This is an Ernst & Young slide, so I will not take credit for it. India is also investing heavily into hydrogen, as I said. Total of $70 billion of support from governments all over the world. 114 countries are pushing for it. And we expect that every year there could be a revenue of 2.5 trillion, which will pay back itself very quickly if done the right way. What is the Indian government doing about it, and how? What are the things we really need to do to push hydrogen? And these are mainly in the areas of R&D, the technology development. I'm sure Daimler is doing it, Ashok Leyland is doing it, Tata is doing it. The investments, clearly both the private and the government investments are required. And the most important thing is skilling. Okay? I don't know, I can ask you to raise hands, but how many of you really know how does hydrogen work, and how can it make it happen? Can you raise your hands? I think I was one of the few ones. Before this I did not know. So I had to study for this. So it will take time for all of us to study and go back to school and learn about how hydrogen works, how do we make fuel cells. Dana actually makes bipolar plates around the world, and we are a leader in that technology. But that is going to be a big area for us, development, testing, tuning the vehicles to the standards of hydrogen, etc. And finally, of course, regulatory and policy support from the government. So with that, I'll stop. Just want one slide on Dana. We do provide complete e-propulsion capabilities. Outside, you can see some of the most sophisticated products we have in the market today, and all of these are localized. I'm not supposed to market the company, but still, you can see the complexity of the products we make. These are 60 to 90% localized in India with PLI benefits, and we basically make them from off-highway vehicles to two-wheelers, three-wheelers, to trucks and buses, and almost 90% of the buses in India today run on the motors and controls that you can see outside. So please feel free to go and take a look at that. With that, I want to thank the CII committee here and also my colleagues on this day. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Pradeep. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I started off in this industry 29 years back, so been through a few cycles. One of the things about the commercial vehicle industry is a cyclical industry, and you have ups and downs. But over these 29 years, I've seen that although you have ups and downs, the squiggly just keeps going higher and higher. And over this period, we've also seen categories being created, like the small commercial vehicle, which if you went more than 10 years back was non-existent, came in as a big segment. The last 5 years has seen actually major changes and has kept engineering departments of vehicle manufacturers extremely busy, starting off with first the increase in the amount of payload that trucks can take. In 2018, it was increased in July 2018 by 20 to 25%. Following that, there was a BS6 introduction, where we actually did a leapfrog from BS4 to BS6. Most countries went BS4, BS5, BS6, but we had to do it at one step. And added to that, now you also have real-time data that's required and onboard diagnostics and all those other add-ons which are coming. If this was not complicated enough, there is also the fuel mix which is now coming in. Of course, most vehicles are diesel, but CNG caught the fancy of operators, truck operators a few years back, and it has seen its ups and downs, but again it's very dependent on the price and the comparative advantage vis-a-vis diesel. So we saw a period where in some categories of the commercial vehicles there was a big surge in CNG, and then when the prices became uncompetitive, it again went down a little bit. But the evolving technologies are probably more interesting. LNG, which is a long-term play because it requires infrastructure to be built up, where the government is committed to it. Second is hydrogen, which is a technology that needs to be developed in so much as one, we need to find a way of making it at a cost-effective way. But fortunately, two of the largest businesses in India have committed to invest in it, both Reliance and Adani. And while all this is happening, I think in the short term, in the immediate term rather, we are limited by diesel and CNG on the medium and heavy commercial vehicles and light commercial vehicles. On buses, thanks to the government's programs that they have, FAME 2, and also state government related subsidies, the central government related subsidies which are given on buses. A lot of the STUs are committed to electric buses. As a matter of fact, India probably has seen the fastest growth in electric buses over the last 2 years. Another segment that is seeing some traction is actually the small commercial vehicle or the delivery vehicle segment, where we are seeing that some of the retailers like Amazon or Big Bazaar have actually expressed interest in buying en masse electric vehicles on the SCV platform. So on the electric segment, I think the government support on one end and also some of the more environmentally conscious retailers are pushing the package forward. But for the main medium and commercial vehicle segment, I think that enabling yourself to be able to handle different fuel options is what most commercial vehicle manufacturers are doing. While all this change has been happening and while we've been trying to evolve as an industry with all the technology changes that are happening, one thing that is becoming increasingly difficult and challenging for companies to do is to find a way of doing all this and still staying cost effective for the truck operator. Because at the end of the day, you have to be able to sell a vehicle to somebody who can make a livelihood out of it, which means that he needs to find a way of getting a return on it. And that, I think, is a big challenge, because we have of course our interest in making the trucking industry more sustainable. We want to bring in regulations that make things safer for people, but at the same time the truck operator needs to find a way of making ends meet, because all this actually pushes up the cost of the vehicle. And this is a challenge. At the same time, if you look at, while we've spoken about the sustainability part and the fuel options, on safety, India has the highest number of road accidents in the world. And the safety culture is actually something which is still missing. But a lot of the options which are available on Western trucks, for example, as Pradeep mentioned in the IA show in Hanover, those options are not available on Indian trucks. If you look at, similarly, if you look at the car market, the West and India, the difference between them on some of these areas like safety are actually fairly narrow, largely due to the fact that you also have a lot of MNCs who are based in India and exporting to developed countries. In the trucking industry, this gap, especially on safety, is slightly higher, but I think this will narrow in the years to come. So the challenges ahead of us is the only certainty is that change is going to be there and uncertainty is going to be there, because a lot of the technologies that you're talking about, be it cost-effective electric, be it LNG, be it hydrogen, are still evolving. And how they evolve over the next 3 to 5 years will actually determine what becomes successful and what is adopted. But in this whole journey, the point that Pradeep made was very relevant, that the Indian government, the Indian rupee is actually a petrocurrency, because we are a large importer of fuel. And the more self-sufficient we get, the stronger we become as a country and the stronger our currency becomes. So there has been an endeavor by the Indian government actually over the last 10 to 12 years, in my experience, where they've actually looked at what do we do to reduce the amount of import that we have. So the self-sufficiency will also drive into various other options, including ethanol, which the government is trying to put in. And this flexibility adds to the complexity that Pradeep mentioned, where the varieties that we have in terms of trucks on Indian roads is far greater than what we have in a lot of other countries. So you have varieties in terms of configurations of trucks, in terms of the fuel options which are there. Increasingly, if you look at it, there are probably more options in some of these than you have on passenger cars. Although when we think of cars, we think of options, but I don't think you have the fuel options quite as much as what we are seeing in the CV industry. So exciting times ahead, a lot of evolving technologies, and I think in that there are opportunities much more than there are threats, because while these changes take place, it will take place over a period of time. It's not going to be an immediate switchover where you're suddenly going to see electric taking over the industry or even a lot of the other fuels. It's going to happen gradually as technologies evolve. With that, I'd like to thank everyone, and I'm delighted to be here at the inaugural CII CV convention.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Pradeep, members on the dais, my dear colleagues. It's difficult to follow stalwarts who have presented everything I wanted to present and then sort of take it from there. But anyway, I'll try to give my own spin on that. Just a disclaimer to start with. If you have come here looking for answers, this is the wrong place. What will happen is we'll have a lot more questions at the end of the session than we'll have answers. And that's the reality. And that is the reality of where we are now. There is nobody in the world who can tell you what the future of CV industry is. What fuel option will win, what technology will win. If anybody claims they know, I think they just bluff. And that's the reality. I think it's in that reality we live. And let me see if I can throw some light, at least my perspective on where I see the CV industry. I can't say when it will happen. At least I will try to show what potential path could be. So if you look at technology trends in general, just Google it, or now use ChatGPT, whatever you want to use too. It'll give you a whole bunch of alphabet soup, case, that, this, and blah, blah, blah. But if you look at from an Indian context, I'm taking Indian context, to me there are 4 key drivers that drive the whole industry as a result of the technology trends and whatever. Yeah. First, I think, is environment. You can call it sustainability at a company level, you can call it ESG at a company level, you can call it net zero commitments at a country level, you can call it local pollution at a city level. I think this, I call it environment. So anything to do with the environment is a trend that will drive the CV industry. Under this trend comes with various alternative fuels you talk about how do I improve CO2 in terms of decrease CO2 in terms of norms and so on. So all this comes under encompassing to me the environment, key driver. Second, I think as Pradeep also said, energy independence. This is probably unique to us and few other countries because with 85% of crude imported, with so much dependence on import and with the ambition we have of growing to a top economy in the world, it is important, and this actually drives a lot of the policies of the government. The energy independence, I think we don't realize that more than environment, in my view, energy independence is what driving the current policy. I think sometimes there is a convergence, sometimes there is a divergence, but I think nevertheless, to me, energy independence is a key driver in terms of what is trending. Third is efficiency. This efficiency, I don't mean efficiency in terms of just the truck running efficiently and so on. I'm thinking efficiency of the logistics network because there's wastage there. Efficiency in terms of how can an operator or a driver operate the vehicle much longer efficiently, it comes to the area of comfort and so on. So it's actually all encompassing. Efficiency not just for product efficiency, the entire ecosystem efficiency. I think there is a lot of waste there, as you would have seen the government initiatives recently in terms of how do you lay the network, how do I improve the logistics, and so on and so forth. Yeah. This is the third key driver. Fourth, of course, is obvious safety. Safety in every aspect. Safety, how do you build safety into the product? Not just for the driver's safety, pedestrian safety, other people's safety. How do I build infrastructure in a safe manner? All that covers under safety. So I think what I'll try to do is I'll cover some of it in detail, some in less detail, but nevertheless I just want to leave with you the thoughts of what I believe are the key drivers, right? I mean, these, you can almost, any of the trends you see, you can probably find a way to slot into these categories. So, before I get into the technology aspect, just want to give you a feel for, as Pradeep also said, we move the nation. Yeah? More than any other country, India depends more on truck goods movement than anywhere else. Yeah? Even though we have a wide rail network, the trucks dominate where it is, and I hope that continues. But nevertheless, this gives you an idea of what that is. Yeah? The flip side is, because we dominate, we also pollute. Yeah? That's a reality. Now, you can argue pollution with respect to other industry, but I think that is the reality of it. So we have a role to play in terms of how do we, as responsible citizens, look at decarbonization, look at lower polluting vehicles and so on. What are some of the challenges? Inherent learning is not just about the product and the trucks and so on. The whole inefficiency in the trucking business also comes from other factors. And some of the key metrics that you would see typically are, there is inherently a low truck population happening in India. It is not as high. It has improved over the last few years because of GST and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the inflation rates we study, it is actually probably in the lower end of the spectrum than what you would see in a lot of the developed countries. Yeah? There is also a much lower penetration of clean propulsion. Well, there is some amount of penetration, but a lot of it is still diesel driven. There is, while infrastructure is improving, there is also inadequate infrastructure, and then there is, of course, significant accident occurrence. Right? So these are some of the inherent issues. I wouldn't say just in truck, but the whole infrastructure of trucking as a business. Yeah. What is the government doing about it? Quite a bit. Actually, I was actually quite surprised when I started doing a bit of work to see what actually the government doing. The government doing a lot of initiatives in terms of not just driving technology, but actually improving overall infrastructure with the aim of improving logistics efficiency, and that's critical. Right now, they believe, I think we have a critical role to play. both in terms of products, right technologies, the right type of vehicles and so on and so forth in making it happen. So with that sort of preamble, I want to get a bit more deeper into what we believe is possible option for green energy or for even energy independence. How many of you think actually seen a true green truck? Is it possible to have a truly green truck? In a sense, day one, it is carbon neutral. Is it possible? I'm talking from well to wheel. Is it possible? Yes? No?
No.
No?
No.
Sorry. But on a lighter note, it is possible. We have this. Yeah? This is a truly carbon negative truck. Yeah? It's illegal. So, I mean, so that the reality is that, right? There is no such thing as perfectly clean truck. It is only related shades of carbon neutrality. Diesel has certain carbon footprint, so does CNG, so does even BEV, right? If you look at the whole life cycle. Yeah, everybody has, it's only a question of relatively how much is the carbon footprint. And that is the one thing to consider. There's no such thing as, if people think there's something called truly green vehicle, nothing like that. To get truly from well to wheel, it is only a relative concept. Yeah? So where are we now? As we said, I believe we are at what we call the messy decade. Up to 2020s, we are all happy. We are running some diesel vehicles, we have few CNG, some battery electric vehicles. Right now, what I call is a messy transition decade. We have a whole hodgepodge of things coming in. It could be diesel, CNG, LNG, battery electric, fuel cell, hydrogen, blah, blah, blah. What will come out in 2030? Difficult to say. I mean, we can make a few guesses, but across the board, there will be one technology? I don't think so. It will be a combination technology, and that's what makes it challenging for us as a commercial vehicle. Just to give you sort of idea of possibilities, I'm not saying they are going to happen this way. Actually, if you look at this way, you can see that every technology is possibly applicable to every segment of the vehicle. The horizontals are possible energy options. The vertical are all the commercial vehicle size, right? Commercial vehicle to independent commercial trucks and so on and so forth. And what actually you see is every combination is possible. Is it probable? Yeah. But I think, is it going to happen? Probably not. And this is where the challenge lies for us. How do we pick the right path? How do we pick the right option? And the challenge here is, it's not like diesel, where if you have a product you put in the market, there is no challenge in terms of infrastructure. Here, the acceptance of the product depends on infrastructure. Even if an OEM has a hydrogen IC vehicle, the OEM is dependent on the infrastructure development. So that's the challenge. So it's actually a much more complex problem in this case, in new technologies, than what you see in typical diesel. If you look at from different perspective, if you look at from perspective of how these technologies rank in terms of initial cost, payload loss, tailpipe emissions, and so on, they have whole set of different. There's no perfect answer. Yeah, if you look at the way you look at it is, if you look at battery electric vehicle, initial cost is high, the payload loss in heavier trucks is possible challenge, but tailpipe is green. Yes, but there is a charging challenge in front, so on. So there is no technology here that is all green, and that's the reality. Yeah. Everything has its own pluses and minuses. So what will probably happen is there will be application-wide, application-specific technology that may make sense. For example, right? For example, if you say battery electric vehicle in heavy trucks, you might think, oh, it is not possible. It doesn't make sense. But I'll give you an application. Even now, it makes sense. This application called terminal tractor, where you take a heavy-duty tractor, you move the containers from the ship as it docks to the yard. It's less than 2 kilometers. Even now, if you calculate and do it right, an electric terminal tractor makes TCO sense, money sense even now. So there are pockets of application already where it makes sense. And that's the challenge. How do I identify pockets of these applications, and how do I sort of look at them as the beachhead in terms of penetration? The transition challenge for commercial vehicle actually is much more difficult. passenger cars, you can say, I can go from a current gasoline to maybe EV. In between, you might have CNG, but beyond that, I don't see a future for passenger car, fuel cell, hydrogen, and so on. But in commercial vehicles, actually, as you look at higher duty vehicles, the complexity is more because options open up more. Yeah. Why do I say that? This is an example of a smaller vehicle, less options. If it's a larger vehicle, it has a lot more applications. It has long haul, short haul, tipper, and so on and so forth. So much more application. So the larger the GVW, the larger the possible options, and therefore larger the complexity, and larger the problem. Right? It is not like anything is free. If you talk about heavy duty vehicle with battery, you have payload loss. You have challenge of accommodating hydrogen tanks. You have also a challenge of the right infra. Yeah. People may think, okay, what is the big deal about charging infra? Everybody is putting up charging infra. But the charging they're putting up is not for commercial vehicles. It is for cars. You would at least need 150 plus kilowatt hour chargers for commercial vehicles to make sense. Yeah. And that is the dichotomy. One side we have charging, but we just don't have the right charging. This is just to give an example of the challenges. Just put some numbers to it. Just look at numbers of what happens as you move from diesel to BEV. There's always a challenge, either it is in terms of the payload loss or the volume that's lost on the vehicle. The challenge is there, especially in heavy-duty vehicles, and that is the main challenge. It's not the technology itself, but the application loss you have, and therefore the customer is buying a vehicle, he is losing part of his business, and that is where we need to get more creative in terms of what we do in which segment. Maybe be creative. For example, battery electric vehicle. Why should it just be a large amount of battery sitting in the vehicle? Can there be options for swap, as an example? Can there be options of flash charging? Can there be e-hybrids? I think all these options will have to be looked at, yeah, and then the right options fit right application. So there's no unique solution; it's multiple paths, and that's the reality of where we are, where we want to be, and better get used to dealing with the uncertainty. From efficiency perspective, I just listed down. It's not just multiple options in some of this topic we discussed today, but the options continue to be. And I think that's also equally important, right? As you look at new energy, new fuels, and so on, you also need to start looking and saying, if battery is 50% of the vehicle cost, how do I actually make the vehicle much more efficient, lightweight, and so on? But that's the challenge. And other fuel options have multiple challenges. From efficiency, the other aspect is the right vehicle sizing. Yeah? I believe soon you will see a little bit more different aspect to how people buy vehicles, be more customized, more configured, and so on. So part of it is how do I have the right vehicle for that application. From an efficiency perspective, also connected vehicles in terms of not just telematics is one step, but in terms of how do I actually have vehicles that could be in one sense sometimes leading to autonomous and so on and so forth, but also how does it communicate seamlessly with the base and so on. Safety, I don't want to bore you with it, but obvious elements of ADAS will come, not necessarily full ADAS, but what will come will be, I think, specific to India. Yes. But I want to leave you with one final thought. Yeah? You might think, oh, who's this guy coming and telling me all this is going to happen? It may never happen. Right? I've been in the industry for 50 years, 60 years, 30 years. Transitions will happen slowly. Yeah. I want to leave you with a picture. This is a photograph of location in New York, taken 10 years apart. Early 1900s, 1910 to 1920, that time frame. Yeah. One on the left is 1910, which was I think 5th Avenue in New York, all horse-drawn carriages. 10 years later, not a single horse-drawn carriage, replaced with motor vehicle. Yeah? And if you go back in history and read some of the challenges, they were saying it's not possible, not going to happen. What are the challenges? They said, oh, gasoline is a hazard. We can't transport gasoline. We can't put it in vehicles, it's not safe. Same arguments you'll hear today in terms of BEV. Yeah. So I just want to leave you the thought that transition sometimes is not in our control. Like you see in the transition in the BEV buses, transition, you're seeing a good transition in passenger cars and electric vehicles. Transitions can happen before you realize it. So it is, I think, my argument that we have to be prepared as industry for the transition. We can't time it, but at least be prepared for it. And with that, I think I want to thank everyone for listening to me, and thank you very much.
A very good morning to all of you. First of all, let me thank CII for having invited for this. I feel is a very, very important and not a very boring session, definitely. Pradeep started off on the right note saying that every commercial vehicle gives life to, or gives a livelihood to two people, the owner and the driver. Let me narrate a real-time incident, a real-time story which I encountered as part of my previous assignment as collector in one of the districts a couple of years ago during the COVID lockdown. I'm sure all of us have come out from those dreaded lockdown days that all of us were busy enforcing lockdowns. And the strange request came to me one day from a whole set of roadside tea shops. I didn't even realize why there was a sudden, there was almost 50 to 100 people mobilized outside the collectorate, and they said, "Sending a tappa panninga, you did very wrong. We were not able to figure out what did we do wrong." Only thing I had done was a couple of days I had diverted, since most of the vehicles were off the road. We took the police and us as district admin took a very concerted decision that we will do a traffic diversion. And little did we realize that we hit upon the livelihood of almost 100 roadside eateries, which were the parking space for these trucks that came from the Tuticorin port. So the entire livelihood or the informal economy linked with the heavy commercial vehicles is not just restricted to the owner or the driver, but there's a whole lot of underestimated or invisible informal economy that we often fail to recognize. And so I feel this conference or this conclave is a very, very important step in that direction, because it serves the informal economy much more than that's visible to the eye. On that note, why as a state, as a Tamil Nadu state, this is very important, because we have a capacity of almost 10 million units. We are the largest, or we share almost 35% of the auto component industry. These are all known facts. I know I'm speaking to industry captains. But why is it relevant at this point in time? Is because the state recently announced, we released a Tamil Nadu EV policy 2023. I'm not sure how many of you in this forum are aware of it. How many of you are aware that the state government released a policy of late? Okay, so thank you for having invited me here. I think that serves the purpose of why I am here. So Honorable Chief Minister launched the TNEV policy. Okay, how many of you know that Ola has invested into one of the largest EV factories in the world in Tamil Nadu? Okay, this happened 6 days after the EV launch, by the way. So, so there seems to be some kind of a disconnect in the sense that there was a EV policy launched and there was a big investment. So somehow that hogs the limelight, and everybody knows that today the world's biggest battery unit, almost a 20 gigawatt capacity, is coming up in Krishnagiri, set up by Ola. And today every single major OEM, every single major component manufacturer, every single major battery production company in the world is looking at TN as an ideal destination in the EV space. So let me just quickly take you through this EV policy and what is Tamil Nadu vision in terms of transitioning to a clean economy, because this is all linked to the overall net carbon neutral society that we aim to. It also aligned with the $1 trillion economy that the state aspires to reach by 2030. So it's like, the both sides of the same coin. The TNEV policy is a very ambitious policy where we look at concerted investments into EV manufacturing. Probably after this, I request CII to share the EV policy document with all the members. It makes a lot of sense because this is a very progressive policy. We did multiple stakeholder discussions with the key EV players. We've got tremendous response. The EV investments have clearly shot up over the last couple of months. Probably one aspect which was missing in this overall conversation, which I feel is very relevant, is in the overall skilling ecosystem. Because suddenly I was in the IIT Madras a couple of days back with the director of IIT Madras and several key auto players, and we were discussing whatever we learned. I'm happy to see that we are all together as a brethren, mechanical engineers. Happy to see my own brethren here. Most of us are mechanical engineers, and suddenly, just imagine all that we learned. The IC engine is no longer there, and this we had to speak in a forum inside IIT Madras with all the mechanical professors. And today we no longer talk about IC engines because EV vehicles, most of the bulk of the components is electronics and motor electrical related. So we need to look at skilling ecosystem, and this is where I feel industry has got a big role to play. Like we said, we really do not understand what the future holds for us in terms of transitioning on the pace. But at the same time, having said that, all the automakers today acknowledge the fact that clearly India's EV transition has been underestimated. We are moving faster, we are progressing faster into the EV space than what was expected. The pace is much larger, quantification will take time in terms of adoption. Talking about the policy perspective, there are two levers which the state government has in its kitty. One is a set of supply side incentives which basically incentivizes manufacturing into the EV space, which in the form of capital subsidies and turnover subsidies and so on and so forth. This is a well-known aspect. But little known is the demand side incentives which the state government is willing to offer in terms of fleet conversion, in terms of adopting EV cities. So 6 cities have been declared as EV cities, and definitely these 6 cities would feature in the transitioning of fleet conversion of commercial vehicles. On that note, this is a right opportune moment, but I would reiterate on 2 simple points. Number one is that a skilling ecosystem is equally important, and the second point is that we talk about transition to LNG, we talk about fuel cells. In fact, the other day I was going through a literature on hydrogen. There are at least 5 flavors of hydrogen. There's a pink hydrogen, there's a green hydrogen, there's a blue hydrogen, there's a brown hydrogen. I'm yet to figure out whether there are more forms of hydrogen, but then we seem to have so many flavors of hydrogen out there. So I think that the evolving space in the hydrogen economy overall, which is surely is the future post 2030, as was highlighted by all the speakers here. I think Tamil Nadu as a state, we are ready for the future in that sense, in terms of policy levers, in terms of implementation strategies, and in terms of having a welcome investment destination, not just in the country, but across South Asia. So once again, I thank CII for having invited me here, and thank you, and let's continue this dialogue. And a request from my side would be to have frequent interaction on the policy levers, both the state as well as the central government policies that come out often. There seems to be a slight disconnect which we need to plug in the coming days to come. Thank you all.
All right, thank you all the dignitaries. Now I request our Summit Chairman, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Thimmaiyan, to join me on stage again for the concluding remarks.
First of all, I would like to thank CII Southern Section for organizing such a wonderful event. Also to the events team, a beautiful setup. Thanks for putting the things together. And thanks to all our sponsors, also bringing some of the exhibits which is going to be informative to the participants. And thanks to all the delegates. And thanks to all my colleagues on the dais. Yeah, so we heard a lot. One thing is very clear: the next decade is going to be messy. Dr. Saravanan said it's going to be a messy decade. I tell my team it's messy middle, right? So when we are transitioning from the classic to the future, there is a messy part. And I would say this is the best time to be working in the automotive industry, and especially the best time to work in Indian CV industry, because no one else, our predecessors never had this experience, and then also the future colleagues will never have this experience, and then we have this experience, and we are going to go through this experience. Let's take the learnings and then work towards making Indian CV industry a better industry that helps to build the nation into a better nation. Thank you, and now we open for the networking break. Thank you.